Hello my dear friends, my name is Nick, this is my art channel and welcome back to the Masterclass on Caravaggio's painting technique. In the previous episode we talked about the underpainting and worked on creating a solid, reliable foundation for the future painting. By the way, you can watch that episode here. Today we will start working with color. And I anticipate that it will be a very interesting discussion because we will try to get to the bottom of it together and figure out what approach Caravaggio himself used. But before we dive right into this topic, I'll say a few words about what I will be doing myself. In this episode, I will create a color base, mix several basic shades, and apply them to the light areas of the image. For my color choices, I will use basic colors: yellow ochre, medium cadmium red, a little of burnt umber, some black, and of course titanium white. Now that I have told you about my plan and you can see the process with your own eyes, we can finally move on to the main topic of this video: exploring Caravaggio's technique. Since unfortunately he left neither notes nor diaries or any other kind of written information, as I mentioned in my previous video, our only hope of penetrating the secrets of his method is some fragmentary information from artists who were Caravaggio's contemporaries and may have known something about that, as well as the results of research, X-rays and chemical analysis. When I began studying information on this topic, the first thing that came to mind was Francisco Pacheco's Arte della Pintura, published in 1649. It is a large treatise on the painting techniques of the masters of that time and earlier, which may contain information that could help us in our research. But unfortunately, I was unable to find a direct description of the specific techniques Caravaggio used in his works. However, certain conclusions can be drawn from what Pacheco writes about Caravaggio. I will read this excerpt in English translation. Please don't judge this translation too harshly, even though it's a little bit rough and approximate. The reason is that Pacheco writes with humor, and it's not really easy to translate that from the Spanish of that time into modern English. But anyway, let's read. In our times, there arose in Rome Michelangelo da Caravaggio, in the pontificate of Pope Clement VIII, with a new dish, so seasoned and sauced, with such flavor, appetite and taste, that I think he has captivated everyone's palate with such gluttony and license, that I fear in them a kind of apoplexy of true doctrine. For the greater part of painters follow him gluttonously, not considering whether the color of their own nature, that is, their talent, is as strong or has the vigor of his to be able to digest so harsh, strange and incompatible a manner, such as working without the necessary preparations for such an action. Whoever painted and achieved as much as this monster of genius and nature, who did so almost without precepts, without doctrine, without study, but only with the force of his genius and with nature in front of him, which he simply imitated with such admiration. That's what Pacheco wrote about Caravaggio. What can we learn from this passage? First of all, that Caravaggio's technique was revolutionary, and Pacheco speaks about this quite clearly. In addition, he mentions a certain true doctrine and emphasizes the contrast between it and Caravaggio's style of painting. Thus, In order to understand how this monster of genius, as the author of the treatise calls him, worked, we need to understand what Francisco Pacheco considered to be the true doctrine. Pacheco probably had in mind the traditional Venetian method of painting, which consisted of constructing a complex optical system using glazing. This method was used by Titian, Veronese, Correggio, and other famous masters of the time. Caravaggio, however, departs from it because he strives primarily for immediacy and truthfulness rather than complex optical layers. It is also known that Caravaggio preferred to paint from life, as Pacheco also testifies. In addition, there is even a quote attributed to Caravaggio himself: "Non si può dipingere bene se non dal naturale," which translates into English as "You cannot paint well unless you paint from life." And now I invite you to match the facts we have. Firstly, Caravaggio revolutionized painting technique and resolutely rejected complex glazing systems. Secondly, he worked from life and insisted on the necessity of this approach. Thirdly, he painted quickly, because otherwise it's simply impossible to paint from life. Thus, the only reasonable conclusion that suggests itself is that Caravaggio painted Alla Prima over a monochrome underpainting. And that's true. We can find confirmation of this in modern research, during which a meticulous analysis of the structure of some of Caravaggio's work was carried out. I am referring to the work of Larry Keith, 3 paintings by Caravaggio, National Gallery Technical Bulletin. This is probably the main material for studying Caravaggio's technique. By the way, you can study it yourself. I'll leave a link to the source in the description of this video. I believe that when we are going to research something, we need to take a fundamental approach. We cannot be guided only by what someone has said. Everything must be confirmed. That's why I decided to leave links to the sources so that you can study the topic on your own, if you wish. Anyway, returning to our David. Now that we have conducted our own little investigation, I think you understand my approach to painting at this stage. I apply paint with broad strokes without thinking too much about the details yet. In addition, I leave the darkest and lightest areas untouched. We will deal with them next time. For now, I will work on the fabric. To be honest, this time I am not trying very hard to depict the escape. I am trying to fight my love of detail and work faster and more confidently. If you are interested in learning how I usually work with fabric, write me in the comments and I'll be sure to make a more detailed video on the subject. For now, I'm just roughly marking the light and shadow, but I'm still trying to achieve maximum expressiveness in this contrast, because we mustn't forget that we are working in the chiaroscuro technique, and the bright, expressive contrast is precisely the main distinguishing feature of this technique. Now you can see that although my image has come to life a little thanks to the addition of color, it still remains too flat and primitive, kind of cartoonish. This is because I have left both the darkest and lightest areas untouched. We will deal with this in the next episode. I think this will be the last episode in this series, and in it we will talk about how to achieve maximum expressiveness and volume with glazes and how Caravaggio did it. Yes, you heard right. Although we have established that Caravaggio painted Alla Prima, he still used corrective glazes. But more on that next time. And for now, I wish you all the best, thank you for your attention, and see you in the next video. Bye!